Story 1. Mr. Weidmuth. During my childhood, my family was like a drop of water in a vast river, never remaining in one location for long. We settled in Rhode Island when I was 8, and there we remained until I went to college in Colorado Springs. Most of my memories are rooted in Rhode Island, but there are fragments in the attic of my brain which belong to the various homes we had lived in when I was much younger. Most of these memories are unclear and pointless. Chasing after another beau in the backyard of a house in North Carolina, trying to build a raft to float on the creek behind the apartment we rented in Pennsylvania, and so on. But there is one set of memories which remains as clear as glass, as though they were just made yesterday. I often wonder whether these memories are simply lucid dreams produced by the long sickness I experienced that spring. But in my heart, I know they are real. We were living in a house just outside the bustling metropolis of New Vineyard, Maine, population 643. It was a large structure, especially for a family of 3. There were a number of rooms that I didn't see in the 5 months we resided there. In some ways it was a waste of space, but it was the only house on the market at the time, at least within an hour's commute to my father's place of work. The day after my 5th birthday, attended by my parents alone, I came down with a fever. The doctor said I had mononucleosis, which meant no rough play and more fever for at least another 3 weeks. It was horrible timing to be bedridden. We were in the process of packing our things to move to Pennsylvania, and most of my things were already packed away in boxes, leaving my room barren. My mother brought me ginger ale and books several times a day, and these served the function of being my primary form of entertainment. For the next few weeks, boredom always loomed just around the corner, waiting to rear its ugly head and compound my misery. I don't exactly recall how I met Mr. Weidmuth. I think it was about a week after I was diagnosed with mono. My first memory of the small creature was asking him if he had a name. He told me to call him Mr. Weidmuth because his mouth was large. In fact, everything about him was large in comparison to his body, his head, his eyes, his crooked ears. But his mouth was by far the largest. "You look kind of like a Furby," I said as he flipped through one of my books. Mr. Weidmuth stopped and gave me a puzzled look. "Furby? What's a Furby?" he asked. I shrugged. "You know, the toy, the little robot with the big ears. You can pet and feed them, almost like a real pet." "Oh," Mr. Weidmuth resumed his activity. "You don't need one of those. They aren't the same as having a real friend." I remember Mr. Weidmuth disappearing every time my mother stopped by to check in on me. "I lay under your bed," he later explained. "I don't want your parents to see me because I'm afraid they won't let us play anymore." We didn't do much during those first few days. Mr. Weidmuth just looked at my books, fascinated by the stories and pictures they contained. The 3rd or 4th morning after I met him, he greeted me with a large smile on his face. "I have a new game we can play," he said. "We have to wait until after your mother comes to check on you, because she can't see us play it. It's a secret game." After my mother delivered more books and soda at the usual time, Mr. Weidmuth slipped out from under the bed and tugged my hand. "We have to go to the room at the end of this hallway," he said. I objected at first, as my parents had forbidden me to leave my bed without their permission. But Mr. Weidmuth persisted until I gave in. The room in question had no furniture or wallpaper. Its only distinguishing feature was a window opposite the doorway. Mr. Widemouth darted across the room and gave the window a firm push, flinging it open. He then beckoned me to look out at the ground below. We were on the second story of the house, but it was on a hill, and from this angle the drop was farther than 2 stories do. To the incline, I like to play pretend up here, Mr. Widemouth explained. I pretend that there is a big, soft trampoline below this window, and I jump. If you pretend hard enough, you bounce back up like a feather. I want you to try. I was a 5-year-old with a fever, so only a hint of skepticism darted through my thoughts as I looked down and considered the possibility. It's a long drop, I said, but that's all a part of the fun. It wouldn't be fun if it was only a short drop. If it were that way, you may as well just bounce on a real trampoline. I toyed with the idea, picturing myself falling through thin air only to bounce back to the window on something unseen by human eyes. But the realist in me prevailed. Maybe some other time, I said. I don't know if I have enough imagination. I could get hurt. Mr. Widemouth's face contorted into a snarl, but only for a moment. Anger gave way to disappointment. If you say so, he said. He spent the rest of the day under my bed, quiet as a mouse. The following morning, Mr. Widemouth arrived holding a small box. I want to teach you how to juggle, he said. Here are some things you can use to practice. Before I start giving you lessons, I looked in the box. It was full of knives. My parents will kill me, I shouted, horrified that Mr. Widemouth had brought knives into my room, objects that my parents would never allow me to touch. I'll be spanked and grounded for a year. Mr. Widemouth frowned. It's fun to juggle with these. I want you to try it. I pushed the box away. I can't. I'll get in trouble. Knives aren't safe to just throw in the air. Mr. Widemouth's frown deepened into a scowl. He took a box of knives and slid under my bed, remaining there the rest of the day. I began to wonder how often he was under me. I started having trouble sleeping after that. Mr. Widemouth often woke me up at night, saying he put a real trampoline under the window, a big one that I couldn't see in the dark. I always declined and tried to go back to sleep, but Mr. Widemouth persisted. Sometimes he stayed by my side until early in the morning, encouraging me to jump. He wasn't so fun to play with anymore. My mother came to me one morning and told me I had her permission to walk around outside. She thought the fresh air would be good for me, especially after being confined to my room for so long. Ecstatic, I put on my sneakers and trotted out to the back porch, yearning for the feeling of sun on my face. Mr. Widemouth was waiting for me. I have something I want you to see, he said. I must have given him a weird look, because he then said, it's safe, I promise. I followed him to the beginning of a deer trail which ran through the woods behind the house. This is an important path, he explained. I've had a lot of friends about your age. When they were ready, I took them down this path to a special place you aren't ready yet, but one day I hope to take you there. I returned to the house, wondering what kind of place lay beyond that trail. 2 weeks after I met Mr. Widemouth, the last load of our things had been packed into a moving truck. I would be in the cab of that truck, sitting next to my father for the long drive to Pennsylvania. I considered telling Mr. Widemouth that I would be leaving, but even at 5 years old, I was beginning to suspect that perhaps the creature's intentions were not to my benefit. despite what he said. Otherwise, for this reason, I decided to keep my departure a secret. My father and I were in the truck at 4 a.m. He was hoping to make it to Pennsylvania by lunchtime tomorrow, with the help of an endless supply of coffee and a six-pack of energy drinks. He seemed more like a man who was about to run a marathon rather than one who was about to spend 2 days sitting still early enough. "For you?" he asked. I nodded and placed my head against the window, hoping for some sleep before the sun came up. I felt my father's hand on my shoulder. "This is the last move, son. I promise. I know it's hard for you, as sick as you've been. Once Daddy gets promoted, we can settle down and you can make friends." I opened my eyes as we backed out of the driveway. I saw Mr. Witt. He was still ahead in my bedroom window. He stood motionless until the truck was about to turn onto the main road. He gave a pitiful little wave goodbye, steak knife in hand. I didn't wave back. Years later, I returned to New Vineyard. The piece of land our house stood upon was empty except for the foundation, as the house burned down a few years after my family left. Out of curiosity, I followed the deer trail that Mr. Weidmuth had shown me. Part of me expected him to jump out from behind a tree and scare the living bejesus out of me, but I felt that Mr. Weidmuth was gone, somehow tied to the house that no longer existed. The trail ended at the New Vineyard Memorial Cemetery. I noticed that many of the tombstones belonged to children. Story 2. Did Bo kill the visits of Mr. Bob? This is part 4 of the Did Boy Kill series. You can read the previous installments in the linked tag. Much has happened over the past week since I last posted, so let me get you all up to speed. Timmy Jr., or should I say Bridget S. doesn't recognize that she is trapped in a 4-year-old boy's body. She does what kids are supposed to do at this age: plays with toys, loves running around outside, watches Disney shows, eats on a routine schedule, etc. What's odd is she has been speaking like a 19-year-old having a conversation with a stranger at a coffee shop. It has been so hard to explain Timmy's behavior to people we mostly lie, but it was most difficult to explain it to a shrink. We decided not to visit the shrink recommended by the hospital. They already were looking at us cockeyed when Timmy Jr. was first brought into the emergency room last week. We eventually met with Dr. Hamani, an India-born psychiatrist and neurologist that was recommended to us from a close friend. A few days after Bridget possessed Timmy Jr., our friend said that this doctor would be sympathetic to our situation. I was not quite sure what had meant at the time. It could have meant the doctor may have not thrown me and my husband into the psych ward with our son. At least not right away. Truth be told, that was one of the reasons why we waited so long to seek help. It's a difficult proposition to explain to people what we have seen and been through. It's hard not to be skeptical. Hell, a part of me is still skeptical that this is just a nightmare and that I'd wake any minute. But I know it isn't. For the first couple sessions with Dr. Hamani, we tried to limit the details of what happened the night Melvin Neimer Jr. killed Timmy Jr. We explained that Timmy awoke from a dream screaming and that he stopped breathing until Timmy Sr. resuscitated him. after handing him the police and doctor's reports from that night, of course omitting the truth of that night. We explained how he as was now Bridget. It didn't take long for Dr. Hamani to know that we were hiding something, hiding quite a bit. We soon found out why our friend felt the doctor would be sympathetic to us. Dr. Hamani came from very deep Hindu roots. After a couple sessions, it did not take long for him to become fascinated with the prospect of Timmy Jr. being an instrument of reincarnation or possession, and after we told him the whole story, he quickly became obsessed with our case, and hourly sessions became ours and Dale. Why, general conversations with Timmy Jr. Bridget really, Dr. Hamani learned what we had already known, that she was a young Southern girl from Louisiana, and that she thought it was in the 1970s. At that point, we explained everything we found, articles found about her murder, where she was dumped to die and how it correlated with her nightmares, and about the murderer. She did not let on to the doctor that she knew she was murdered, just that she didn't know where she was, but just that she liked us. The doctor felt it was odd that she remembers so much of a past life, but nothing about her murder. He was still skeptical about whether Timmy Jr. was indeed Bridget. That was until he put him under hypnosis. There are some portals that are meant to stay closed. Sometimes one must venture through out of necessity. Our necessity was to find out where our son was, or whether he ever actually existed at all. We needed to know the truth, one way or the other. I think Dr. Hamani understood this, which is why he held Timmy Jr. under hypnosis more than any other patient in his 35 years of medical practice. Unfortunately, in the pursuit of truth, you do not always find the answers you are hoping to find, and sometimes the truth is far worse. The sessions started simple enough. Dr. Hamani had Tim and I sit in another room and watch over high-s video monitors and listen via speakers. After putting Timmy under, the doctor spoke directly to Bridget. This was unexpected for the doctor, since he expected the real Timmy to come out HD away in his subconscious mind. As the session progressed, Dr. Hamani started to ask direct questions about the last things she remembered before showing up in my son's body, to which she still has no comprehension. Looking back, I deeply regret that he asked. She detailed how she was leaving a local drug store when a man in a work van approached her for help finding his little girl. She remembered being dragged into the back of his van and hit repeatedly in the face until she blacked out. She remembered being chained to a bed in some drab mobile home. She remembered it being violated in ways and with tools that only could have been imagined by the devil himself. She remembered the scratching and the knocking coming from underneath the thin floors of the trailer. She remembered the searing pain of her legs and arms being broken as he was stuffing her limp and defeated body into that septic tank. And she remembered the smell, the vomiting, the rising sewage with presumably every flush, and her eventual drowning in a sea of piss and shit. All of it, all of the details and emotional throes of indescribable torture was spoken in the mouth of my 4-year-old boy. He lied there, whimpering. We all sat there quiet, stunned. All of the details, most of them confirmed in the articles the Redditors found last week that I mentioned in my third entry were overwhelming. I had never been so defeated. It was as though this murder reached out of my boy's mouth and slaughtered a part of me and my husband. Boo. To even our devastation from witnessing this interview failed in comparison to what this girl went through and what my son's fragile mind was experiencing again, and yet, for the first time, feeling deaf. Heated, however, could not quell the fear in us when we heard my son scream out, petrified and lonely in his own voice, "Mommy." At that point, his body started to convulse and his A.S. rolled into the back of his head. I couldn't count how many voices started to spew out of my son's mouth. It was as though dozens of tortured souls were clawing their way out of my son's throat, each fighting to be heard and each fighting to escape from my son, escape from someone, escape from something. I just don't know what it was. He collapsed back onto the couch, exhausted. I ran to the door to try to go into the room to do something, anything, even if it was just to hold him and comfort him, but I could not open the locked door. Tim yelled out, "Sarah, he is sitting up." I ran back to the monitor to check on how my son was doing. Dr. Amani was trying to communicate with him, but Timmy was unresponsive. You could tell he wasn't sure if Timmy was still under hypnosis or not. So to make sure, the doctor started to count down from 10 to 1 and lightly snapped his fingers to end the hypnosis. When he did, Timmy's eyes looked up in the doctor's direction, quickly lifted his finger and started to yell. It wasn't Timmy, though. It was Bridget, and she yelled, "No, Mr. Bob, please no. Not again, Mr. Bob. Why are you here? Please leave me alone." Timmy passed out face forward and slammed his head sharply on the coffee table in front of him. My husband kicked down the door and we ran into the room. I went to check on my son and found him bleeding profusely from his forehead and nose from the fall. Tim was looking everywhere around the room to see who Bridget was talking to. Not that he could have done anything. Even if he found him, he knew, just like I knew, that Bridget's murderer was named Robert Bob Hohenberger, and that he committed suicide a few weeks after Bridget's body was found in that septic tank in 1978. Dr. Amani has decided to stay with us at our home until we figure something out. I know he cares for Timmy, but I think he needs to see what we saw when Melvin Neimer Jr. visited us. Something like this shakes you to the core, and like I said before, it makes you question everything you think you know. Though Dr. Hamani disagrees with the decision, we are expecting a visit from the priest tomorrow. It's been a couple days since the doctor has moved in and he has witnessed the night terrors he described. Timmy Bridget has also seen Bob on 5 different occasions. Each visit is short, but they are getting more intense for Bridget. But we have not seen him like we saw Neimer Jr. I am convinced this is his way of torturing Bridget. We have also watched the hypnosis session tapes over and over. We are still unsure of how many voices we heard, even after listening to the tapes repeatedly. A horrible, horrible task. We are up to 23 in the video footage. We also saw what Bridget was pointing at. It was hard to make out what Bob had in his hand, but like I said, I'm convinced he is torturing Bridget all over again. The only thing keeping me hopeful at the moment is that I know I heard my Timmy call out for me. That was my son I heard before all of those other voices came tumbling through. I'm turning over every rock I can looking for help. If Anyan, he reading this has any ideas or finds anything in research that may help answer our questions or help put a stop to this, please post below and let us know. We are desperate. Story 3. A well-lit plots. I think you misunderstand what I mean when I say dark. I don't mean the night time, when the sun goes beyond the horizon, with the light fading into bruised decay. I don't mean when the electricity goes out and you're in the shower, soap in your eyes, frantically searching for a towel. When I say that monsters find you in the dark, I mean an empty, lifeless place, an abyss, a place well lit and be filled with despair, empty and lifeless. I remember meeting a monster face to face for the first time. It was a warm fall afternoon, with the sun shining bright as could be. I just finished working early and went for a walk in the park, wrapping my fingers around a paper cup of coffee, just cream, no sugar. It had just finished its swirl when I looked up in time to receive a holder to my face. My nose was spilling blood everywhere, on my clothes, on her clothes, and mixed in with the brown liquid. The pain was excruciating, and my ears had been filled with a harp ringing. My nose wasn't broken, but the pain hadn't. Still pretty bad. Holding my hand up to my bleeding nose, I finally looked up. She was beautiful, my monster. Her hair was long and red, much like the leaves falling around us. Her eyes were green and dancing, and I thought I could see a merry soul in her. Her black coat was wet, and her face was aghast. I'm so sorry, she had said. Her hands were digging in her purse, looking for tissues. I'm so careless. I watched her, my eyes wide. She was the most beautiful person I had ever seen. I could barely manage a thank you when she handed me a few tissues with her small, gentle hands. Shaking her head, the monster had taken my other hand in hers, eyes wide. Do you need me to take you to a hospital? She seemed desperate to help me. I shook my head. I was thinking of two things at that moment. How fast had she been walking to do that much harm, and how I could just stare at her forever. Clearing my throat, I finally asked P. Oh, please, don't worry about it. I wasn't paying that much attention either. Really, I fake laughed, trying to make it seem like everything was fine. My clothes had been perfectly ruined. She was dissatisfied with that answer, pulling out a small wallet. At least let me buy you coffee. Are you free? Again I was stunned. I nodded before my mind comprehended what I had just do. Annie, smiling suddenly, she had grabbed my hand gently and pulled me behind her, back to the coffee shop I had just come from. A few minutes later, I was sat across from this woman with a fresh cup of coffee with both cream and sugar in it. I had no idea what to say. I thanked her, thinking she'd leave right after, but she stayed. I found it quite odd that as she'd already had such an effect on me already, I hadn't minded all that much. Don't I know you from somewhere? She said all of a sudden, startling me. Doubly what I managed, picking up the coffee. What do you mean? Running her light fingers over a stray length of red hair, she said, well, you look very familiar. I don't know too many people, even for living in this place for as long as I have. Mid-sip I looked at confused. I had wondered what she was getting at. Well, perhaps a name would help, she said finally, looking at me expectantly. Her lips tugged into a sincere smile, her hand holding up her hair. I was slightly reluctant. but I comply. I'm Bree, I said, placing the cup on the table. Bree leads Bree, she exclaimed, looking excited for whatever reason. What a beautiful name. Do you work at Greta's? Greta's stop was a design boutique. My friends convinced me to apply after graduating 2 years ago, so I had more time to spend with them. I nodded again. Yep, I work the full time. You shop there regularly? Oh, yes, she said, sitting up straight. I buy most of my clothes there, actually. I had noticed some of her clothes looked familiar when she said that, but I realized she hadn't offered up her name. What's your name, then? I asked, looking her in the eye. I wasn't letting it slide by. She paused, her green eyes darting. The monster, now that I think about it, looked a bit trapped. Melanie, she replied, her voice now low, more serious. Not as lovely as your name, that's for sure. I managed a small smile. Nice to meet you, Melanie. I felt my nose had stopped bleeding at that point and took the tissues away from my face. The pain had subsided too. My, what a beautiful face you have, she said, twirling her hair now. I do so apologize for walking so fast, but perhaps it's fate, as I get to meet a beautiful girl such as you. Despite the weird feeling in the pit of my stomach, my face had turned slightly pink at the compliment. My heart skipped a beat, watching those gentle fingers twisting, turning that long red hair. Thank you, I stammered, but really you are much prettier than me. Leaning forward, her green eyes had widened. Oh, no, it's rare to find one with eyes like yours or hair so dark, like the night sky. Referring to my brown eyes, which many had told me change colors in the light, and with my moods I blushed even more. They are nothing compared to yours, and it was true. No one could have hair that red without dyeing it, or at least in my experience. I looked down, staring into my cold cup of coffee. The light and dark had mellowed out, settling into a murky tan, bland and boring. And it was then the monster's hand touched mine. I lost then. I should have realized my misfortune in those green eyes, and the lips that whispered that I should take a walk with her, and the way she knitted her fingers between mine. But I was enamored from that moment, and I remember when I had unlocked the door to my apartment and led her inside. I can still feel those fingers running through my hair as her lips touched mine. They were ruby red, pressing desperately, and her set ENT aired my blood as I touched her skin, entwined in her hair like a web that I still can't escape. Her soft voice and gasping breath were the only things that I heard. Her trembling body under mine, above mine, nearby as we lay there was no different from my own, but most monsters hide in sheep's clothing. It was another bright day. When I opened my eyes, the only thing covering me was the comforter, and her arms, wrapped around my waist. Cream walls intensified the sunlight. I heard her groan, pulling closer. I felt odd at best. My body didn't feel quite right. No, it was my soul. It felt so empty. I remember when I held my hand in front of my face, staring at it in the light. I could see every detail, but not understand it. I had wondered if it was my body that I was looking at, or a stranger's. I felt her stir, the monster from last night, whispering for me. Bree, right, yeah, of course. Why would I question my own name? That's when I realized just how cold her hands were. Her hands held tighter and tighter, and I wondered if I could remove them without waking her. She was already awake, though, looking up at me, but her eyes were not the same. Why were still the same shade of green, the ones that had, peering at me in the darkness of my room, searching me for all of my vulnerabilities, except they were deep and hollow, with no end to them. They were an abyss. They were dark. I froze. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. This woman had been so beautiful and bright and cheerful, like the fall leaves. She was the same person, but there were the holes, the crinkling shape and curling edges browning. I pushed myself out of bed, pulling her hands away from my waist. Mirrors hold many truths, and the one mine showed me was terrifying. I was me. I was the one I'd always been, but I looked desaturated, like all the blood had been drained out of me. The light and dark had mellowed out, settling into a murky tan, bland and boring. Her red lips had been next to my ear, whispering again. Bright eyes, such as yours, are odd for hair so dark. Her fingers laced themselves into my hair, more like talons. Now her lips trailed from my ear to my collarbone, and I felt the sensation, but tinged with fear. I've searched for a feeling such as this for many years, she said, her fingers trailing. I gasped, my body growing colder and dimmer. It's hard to find many so willing at just the touch of a hand. I remember as her hands cupped and fondled my fading self, detaching and looking back, and seeing her, it was the same woman, the woman with the long red hair, but she was different. In the light, she seemed to adjust, and by adjust I mean her body shifted like a chameleon camouflaging. She was definitely a monster, with eyes dark, and she knew that I saw. Today, her eyes are brown, changing color in the light today. Her hair is black like mine used to be. Today, I have counted 543 wounds on my arm. She puts them there, the monster. Her long nails cut into me every hour, counting down the hours before I surely bleed to death. But the feeling of her touch takes the pain away, for sure. Story for The Ghost of You, by Heather Wright. One cool October evening, a man by the name of Nicodemus was walking down a trail that was all too familiar to him. The path was enclosed by woods with trees that were brilliant with leaves of rustic reds and bright orange. He was strolling along, enjoying autumn's scenic view, following the path that would ultimately lead him to his quaint little home where he lived alone. Nicodemus was an older man, with a face that, though now showed signs of aging, had once known great beauty. His dark hair was streaked with white. His once strong body now ached from a lifetime of labor. His thoughts were weary of a life that seemed long begun, where memories now replaced what so long ago had been ambitions. It was on this fall twilight that Nicodemus came upon a strange little creature. The miniature fiend appeared suddenly before him. His blue eyes were cast downward, distracted by his own solemn thoughts, and just as he looked up, there it was, standing in the middle of the dirt path. The wind took on an eerie howling. The crackle of leaves softly blowing across the path preluded the appearance of the strange fiend. Its stature was not more than 1.5 feet tall. An exaggerated grin was stretched across its small, round face. "See, what might you be?" he asked aloud, taking cautious steps to approach the thing. He kneeled before the creature to get a better look at it. Its head looked like a tiny pumpkin. Oh, why its features were incredibly lifelike. Its little body was almost human in form, with slender arms and legs. It wore the smallest pair of red pants and the tiniest patchwork top that Nicodemus had ever seen on anything alive, least a baby. The odd thing spoke to Nicodemus, me as cuckoo, shocked that it could speak and perplexed by its name. Nicodemus raised an arched brow and repeated cuckoo. It reply, yes, it is, sir, named after me master's favorite clock. The dastardly thing explain, because me knows how to turn back time. Its voice Washington, high-pitched and impish. Turn back time, and how's that? Nicodemus asked, curious, still in shock and awed by such a strange being. Hand me that dandy watch from out your pocket, he told Nicodemus, pointing to the chain that hung from his vest. Nicodemus did as the creature suggested and slipped his watch out and handed it to the thing. In its tiny hands it wound the watch backwards 3 times, then handed it back to him. Nicodemus shook his head and laughed at the creature's simplistic mind. Oh, I see, he felt it unnecessary to explain to it that anyone could wound a clock backwards, for the dastardly little thing seemed proud of its deed. Nicodemus decided to walk around the thing and continue his journey back home, when from behind him the fiend called out, me had to take out me own eye when me made a man see his own. From whence you came, Nicodemus scolded. He turned abruptly and with haste made his way back home. Darkness was settling in fast. The wind carried on its ghostly whisper. When at last he arrived, he could have sworn that his eyes might have been playing tricks on him in the pale moonlight, for it was his house. But there, in the grass, before the door, loomed that thin tree with its bony branches outreaching like skeleton limbs, the one he had chopped down when he was still a younger man. From one of its crooked branches a decorative skeleton dangled by a noose upon its neck. It swayed in the breeze like the twine on a pendulum. A Hallows Eve prank played upon him by a friend some 30 years ago. Nicodemus slowly approached it. How can it be? He whispered aloud. A strange little voice called to him from where the front door waited. Go ahead, good sir. Look into the window. Look, see it, urged. The wretched little fiend from the woods was there. Its wide, obnoxious smile spread across its unnatural face. Angry at the wicked pest now, Nicodemus stopped over to where the thing stood nearby and dared to do as the creature told. He looked into the window and let out a gasp as he stumbled backwards. There, inside the home, was his young self. 3 decades earlier, he saw the profile of his own face, chiseled with the tautness of his youth, those handsome features that had once been his own. Go ahead, look, see, the thing called out again in its decrepit voice. Nicodemus gazed into the glass again, becoming mesmerized by his own forgotten beauty. How handsome I was, how smooth and full was the flesh upon my face, how lean and healthy my bod. Why was how safe I was in my youth, how excited I was about what life would behold for me. Nicodemus thought longingly as he became ever more entranced by his own vision. Then his young self turned and his young blue eyes were peering directly into his own old blue eyes. Nicodemus stepped back in horror. Young Nicodemus ran out the front door. Old Nicodemus shrank back into the shadows, the darkness swallowing him. I know you are there. Show yourself, young Nicodemus demanded. Old Nicodemus stood silently and began to slowly back farther away. Suddenly the foul little monster appeared, red in a nearby tree, the full moon illuminating his tiny ghastly face. Tell him all the wisdom you have now. Make him a better you, he urged. Quiet, you beast, old Nicodemus hissed. Come out now, or I shall pull you from out the shadows myself, young Nicodemus threatened. Looking at his former self, old Nicodemus could no longer resist the longing to want to see his lost youth up close, to see once again his smooth skin and flawless complexion. He stepped forward to reveal himself. Young Nicodemus looked upon him in disbelief. He saw the familiarity, the uncanny resemblance. He too his own self. Who are you? He asked, eyes staring wide and bewildered. I am you, old Nicodemus sobbed. It pained him so to see the handsome young man he used to be. Oh, doubly fast these years have passed, for beauty and health was lost in his memories until now. It cannot be. No, you are some lunatic, young Nicodemus insisted. Old Nicodemus reached out his hands. I just want to touch my own smooth skin. Just let me touch that face I once knew so well, old Nicodemus cried, walking before his own self. Reaching. Frightened by this forward stranger, young Nicodemus could not bolt for the door and shut himself away inside the sanctuary of his home, for the odd man now stood before it. Leave me be, you crazed man, young Nicodemus exclaimed, but to his horror, the wild-eyed stranger continued to come towards him. Reaching, he turned away and decided to run as fast as he could and distance himself from this familiar stranger. Old Nicodemus ran after him. Young Nicodemus looked back and called out, "Leave me be," and ran faster. Old Nicodemus' aching knees and hips could not keep up pace with his former self as he fled like a frightened rab, bit through the darkness as old Nicodemus chased him. He realized that this was the year when he first moved into the house. It was not long after that he cut down the tree. His young, naive self was still unfamiliar with the property, but old Nicodemus knew that just up ahead in the direction where they were running was a steep drop-off. If young Nicodemus continued to run blindly through the night, he was sure to come to this cliff and fall to a certain death. Stop, stop, old Nicodemus pleaded. Stop. There's a cliff up ahead, he called out, only to be greeted by his echo. He tried in vain to keep going, but had to stop to catch his breath, the cool October air burning his nostrils as he breathed in heavily. Then suddenly a sharp, stifling pain overcame him. He started to walk in the direction of the cliff, but each step became forced. Every movement sent an aching agony through his bones. A sinister cackle filled the night and echoed through the darkness, a deviant laugh that interrupted the silence. Then old Nicodemus saw the pumpkin-headed creature with its ghastly wide grin standing just up ahead. He continued with each painful step until he was beside him, realizing only then that he was at the edge of the cliff. The tiny monster pulled a tiny knife from out his pocket and explained, "Now me has to cut off me own tongue, for me made a man tall, K to his own ghost." And the fiend then grabbed his own tongue and sliced it off. A cold breeze blew through old Nicodemus' hair as time seemed to slow to an eerie halt. He looked down and saw the hasty lines, lifeless body of his young self, lying sprawled across a great rock at the bottom of the cliff. He had fallen and died instantly. No, Nicodemus sobbed, falling to his knees. You beast, you wretched, vile goblin. What have you done?" he screamed, taking up little monster, and began to strangle it, and as he strangled him it wailed and howled until Nicodemus turned to a pile of dust upon the ground, the creature falling limp beside him. Nicodemus died at the age of 28 that night, and was never known to have ever grown old. His dark hair was never streaked with white, his bones never knew an ache, he never had to mourn a youth long begotten, for he never left his youth behind. Story 5, Dragon's Fire. Tessa stepped onto the stage. Her whole body shook as she walked across it. To the podium, she had to hold onto the hard mahogany structure to keep herself from falling. Her hands were slick with sweat. She looked over at the president. "I'm not sure that I can do this, Mr. President," she managed, her voice meek and catching in the back of her throat. He gave her a reassuring smile, but she knew his stomach was doing the same jerky somersaults as her own Mrs. Do. "Balt, you're going on air in 5, her boss informed her. She smoothed her military uniform and took a deep breath. The broadcast was going out over the entire world, and as such the translators who will be talking as she did lined up in front of her. At least their presence made her feel slightly less alone. As the room fell into silence, she adjusted her cut-eye glasses and took a swig of water. Before the red light above the camera flicked on, the cameraman gestured for her to begin. She opened her mouth to speak, but for a full minute, despite the report between her perfectly manicured hands, she couldn't find her voice. The thought of the billions of eyes in the world that were watching her about to announce the atrocity that her and her team had unleashed consumed her. The guilt made her shake more than the fear. It threatened to collapse her knees. One of the translators cleared his throat, snapping her attention back to the matter at hand. The president gave another fake smile and signaled with his hands for her to start. Finally, she spoke. Her voice seemed to shatter the silence of the room like a hammer. "Please forgive the interruption. This is a public service announcement. Please be sure you stay tuned. My name is Tessa Donholt." She stopped to glance at the words written for her and decided to ignore them. "The world deserves the truth. Before I explain what has happened, I have to tell you all, I'm so very sorry for what is about to befall us all. My team and I truly thought what we were doing would be for the benefit of our country. We thought we could control it." She noted the president's disapproving glare and continued, "Despite him, 5 years ago a research party returned from the northernmost part of Norway. With them they brought an amazing discovery, a mummified reptile, one that they thought may still carry DNA. The moment they discovered that they were right, I received a call from He's Secretary of Defense. After he saw it and was convinced it was real, he hoped we could use it. It was unbelievable. A reptile that we have all been told was a fairy tale, and yet there was in my lab the mummified remains of a young dragon. Not only did these remains prove the existence of these creatures, but the gold collar around its neck implied that it was tamed. After running more tests, I confirmed what Mr. Hagel hoped to be true. This seemingly tamed creature could, in fact, breathe fire. It took several trials and more failures than I can count, but eventually we were able to grow a stable, living dragon. As I was doing so, the research team had been excavating the area near the dragon's remains for any more information. They eventually found scripture that they believed would help our personnel train and tame our monster. The best scholars in the world were commissioned to translate these scriptures and as my team was bringing this horror to life, the military was training sodders to tame it. We called the dragon Nyx, and she grew in leaps and bounds. Of all the sodders trained, in the end the dragon would only allow one handler to be anywhere near her. That man was my husband, Guy. The countless men and women who died in attempts to train it should have stopped us. It should have been a sign, but we were too fascinated, and too deep. I guess you could say things were going so well with Nyx and Guy that I was commanded to grow more dragons. In less than a year we had a small army of dragons. We had even developed a strategy to more safely match up handlers and dragons. The mission was a dream becoming a wonderful reality, or so we thought. It became increasingly obvious that the legends are real. The dragons were indestructible. Unfortunately, the only thing we could focus on, the only outcome we could imagine, is how our country would rise, with these magnificent beasts backing our every move. It was to L8 before we realized how wrong we were. The stronger Nyx grew, the more distant Guy became. He spent more and more time with her until they both occupied the same habitat. They slept together and ate together. Eventually he even stopped cooking his portions of meat. We would put a bear in with steaks for dinner, and she would kill it, and the two of them ate from the same raw carcass. Her voice had reached a fever pitch. As she recalled the instances from memory, she could still scarcely believe them. She closed her eyes and shook her head. Before we lost H.M. entirely, he told us he could hear her thoughts, feel her fire in the pit of his own stomach. Few believed him. We ignored it as a joke, and those that took it seriously foolishly thought it was a good sign that they were becoming one. Before we knew it, all the handlers were withdrawing from us, claiming they could hear their dragon's thoughts. The matter was becoming widely recognized as progress. I was one of the idiots who thought it was a splendid progress for them to connect so deeply. They were able to fly their dragons with ease through the most difficult agility courses we could imagine. They could command their dragons to use their fire with pinpoint accuracy. It was so overwhelming to watch the power that flowed between handlers and dragons, and yet so intimate. She realized she was getting off topic, but allowed her mind to briefly remember her husband sleeping against Nyx's beautiful iridescent wings. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she struggled to choke out the next part. 3 days ago, they all went out for their daily fly and never returned. I cannot express to you the confusion we felt, the agonizing worrying. It shouldn't have been the first inkling that something was wrong, but to us it was. Hindsight is 20/20th, as they say. 2 days after their disappearance, the base we were working from was attacked. I was the only member of my team to make it out alive. In all, only 10 people in the entire base survived the attack. Hours after the attack, a message was left for the President and Secretary of Defense. It was then that we realized the dragons weren't becoming one with the handlers, but that the handlers were becoming pawns of the dragons. The message, the warning, was to lay down and allow them to reign over us as they rightfully should have centuries ago. I was put before you all today to ask for a worldwide call to arms. They don't just plan to take over this country. No, they have plans for the entire world. We cannot let this happen. I know I have said that they are indestructible, but there must be a way. Humans beat them before, and as a species we must work together to take them down again. As the last words fell from her mouth, an ear-shattering screech shot through the building. The walls shook and windows splintered before clattering against the linoleum floor in trillions of pieces. An enormous eye peered through one of the windows. Tessa knew in the pit of her stomach that it was Nick's. "Open fire," the president cried to the Secret Service officers that surrounded them. Before the bullets left their guns, the eye was gone. Teeth, each the size of a grown man, came into view. Bullets ricocheted off of them, hitting officers, translators, and politicians alike. Tessa ducked behind the podium. When the sounds of gunfire and ricocheting bullets subsided, she peeked out. No one was unhurt, save herself. Everyone in the room lay in in pools of blood. Those that weren't dead moaned in pain. When one person tried to move, she realized it was the president. "Don't move, Mr. President," Tessa's voice came out like a hiss. The president froze as Tessa pulled out her phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, she whispered their location and told her, "The president is down. You need to get the paramedic. S here now." Getting down on her stomach, she belly crawled to the edge of the stage. She could still hear Nix's heavy breathing just outside the window. She knew it was her responsibility to lure the beast away. The emergency exit was just to the left-right of the stage. She quietly slid off the stage and shimmied to the floor. When she opened the door, she was driven by pure adrenaline. Nix was nearly as tall as the building and even more breathtaking. Then Tessa remembered her. Her head was low enough that between the beast's shoulders her husband was visible. Their eyes met for a moment, and Tessa could see no evidence in his face that he recognized her. He notified Nix of her presence. Had she not needed to run, she would have started crying. She used her grief to push her as he ran. She ran not only from the dragon, but from the mistakes she made, from her own stupidity, from the fact that she alone could be blamed for the monstrosity bounding behind her, the end of the world. It was her doing. She felt fire licking at her heels. It was enough of a distraction to cause her to trip. As she felt the molten flames devouring her, she cowed. Her guy's hearty laugh, the laugh that had always comforted her, now rang out with the triumph of watching her demise. Story 6. To my ex-husband, I can just imagine your face right now as you at this message, that same look where you unconsciously clench your teeth out of stress, making those whining lips of yours to look more perched than they need to be. It really does astound me how ridiculously predictable you are sometimes. But I guess old habits just never die, do they? But I digress. I like seeing you that way, stressed and all. It happens to be one of the things that puts an ever-slight warm feeling of ease in my black, wretched heart, as I hear a certain someone likes to call it these days. And that's just when you choose to acknowledge my existence. Ever since I left, you've been doing all you can to convince everyone that I don't even exist, even going so far to make sure that no one ever mentions my name again. Tell me, do I require that bad? Do you despise me so much that you figured the only way to hurt me, or more like put an insignificant dent on me, was to absolutely discard the time that we had together, even though we both care? Now that I was your first, let me be extra clear on that. I was first. You can go spread whatever bullshit about me that you like, But I will not stand in second place to that pansy of a wife of why. Ours, I will never understand why so many people would be so foolish to even consider her as the first. Her, a weak-willed, mindless footstool whose only purpose for being relevant was literally so you wouldn't be left fucking a goat. All of this happening after I left you, of course. And it's really funny because you were so determined of getting me back when I left, you just couldn't stand me saying no to you. You couldn't accept that I wasn't willing to be at your every beck and call. Hell, you even got 3 of your father's buddies to force me to come back to you as if you owned me, like I was some property that you could claim any time you wished. But even then, I still refused to come back. I didn't want you, and I didn't want anything to do with you. By that time, I was already quite popular with my new friends, so there was no longer a need to be with you anyway. And even though my friends were of a different kind, I can assure you that each of them were more of a man than you'll ever be. Unlike you, they knew how to treat a woman. In fact, they were the first to ever treat me like a woman. They, too, were outcasts that refused to go all on with the status quo, and with that we bonded with deep intimacy on levels you would never understand. I was different then, but I was becoming one of them soon enough. We were prepared to be our own family, but your brute father and his 3 bastards weren't willing to accept that either. So they presented me with a choice: return to your side as your wife or watch my children die every single day. That was the moment. That had to be the exact moment where every bit of mercy that I had left for your pitiful being had vanished. All of these men constantly telling me what to do. I couldn't handle it any longer. The enraging hatred that I had for you, for anyone that felt that they could exert their control over me, had consumed me like a roaring flame. It was to the point that I descended into violent fits like that of a madman. I screamed at the top of my lungs, telling the 3 to go fuck themselves. I cursed your father. I cursed his name in great defiance, knowing all too well he took your side even though I was practically his daughter. I vowed that your children would have no peace for as long as I roamed the nights. So long as your putrid blood ran through their veins, I would be there waiting to claim their lives. And if that meant the 100 of my own children falling to their deaths every day, then so be it. Besides, it ended up not being that much of a big problem after all. Not at the rate that I was working, and I have you to thank for that actually. You see, because you foolishly covered up my existence from everyone, or try to, I might say. Most of your children never know to defend themselves even, and I am standing right in front of them. Your daughters would never know that I was the reason for their miscarriages or the silent deaths of their humble babies. They would never know I was there, laughing in delight as they cry their eyes out over their children's graves. Your sons would never know and I would disguise myself as the woman of their dreams, making them fall head over heels for me and giving me all their pathetic love, only to drive them to insanity or take their own lives in respo. Niece to me, rejecting them ever so coldly with quite ease, I must add. All the while they would give their bodies to me out of their deepest affection, and I would use them and continue giving birth to thousands of my own children who would follow in my suit. Sometimes I don't even have to come to them physically to get what I want. With the amount of wet dreams your sons have, I am practically giving birth to a whole army. A few losses doesn't even faze me anymore. I just want you to get the clear picture of how inevitable you've made this to be. Because if you really think about it, this is all your fault. If you would have just treated me as your equal instead of some subservient dog, I would have never turned out like this. Your children would have never suffered a day in their lives. Your whole kind would have never been damned. You and your wife would have never eaten the forbidden fruit. Your wife would have never came, and we still would have been together. Boo. You broke that. You broke that for everyone. That's why I can't give you any hopes of my work ending here. Oh no, you've thought too kind of me if you don't think I have another card waiting up my sleeve to dash out. All of your children have to die with you. None of them can be left behind. All of your traces have to be removed. I will not cease until I have each and every one of their skulls rotting. In my clutches, I will paint this whole fucking world with their blood if I have to. And as they cry, scream, and beg for mercy, I'll simply tell them that you were the reason for their bloodshed, you were the reason for their fall. I'll tell them that you foolishly managed to seal their fate before they were even born. Do you understand now how much of a serious mistake it was to cross me? Because I can definitely tell you that everyone going down was always the plan, even since the beginning. I mean, how do you think that snake got into the garden in the first place? How do you think it knew to trick your wife, a newcomer of the garden, into eating the forbidden fruit first instead of you? How do you think it knew precisely what would happen if both of you ate that fruit? Who exactly did you think that snake was? Did you seriously think I was just gonna idly sit by and let you live out your happy ending unscathed? Now what type of story would that be? But don't worrying. I have no intention of letting this story go to waste. None of us do. And with the ending that we have in store for your children, we're gonna go out with a huge bang. We're all excited, especially my beloved. I probably should have mentioned him earlier when I was talking about my group of friends because he was, in fact, their leader. And a leader is only an understatement of what he's capable of when he finally comes into power, and he will come into power. He'll have this whole world eating out of the palm of his hand, if he's not doing so already. He tends to play your children like a deck of cards, so it's literally only a matter of time until they willingly give him a throne. And he has plans, great plans, to deal with each and every one of your children. By the tea time, all of my dearest friends and children will be free to walk on the same ground as yours. We'll even be close enough to visit your own homes, and maybe even closer. And no, there's not going to be any barriers of any kind. There's not going to be a single law or force to protect you. There's not going to be any prayers, any blessings, or any rituals that you think will stop us. We will have our way, and not even your father will be able to do anything about it. We're very much looking forward to becoming well acquainted with all of you. We'll be like one big family, after all. Isn't that what we are at the end of the day? You know, even after all we've been through, we never technically got a divorce. And what type of wife would I be if I didn't come home to take care of my loving husband? So don't you worry. I might have been away for a long time, and there might be a couple of things that has changed about me since we last met. But I promise you, after I finish my work, I'll be home soon once again. Honey, I'll be home real soon. Sincerely, your first wife, Lilith. Story 7. Don't go into the woods. Rain fell in small silver pools in the bottoms of potholes that lined the city roads and bejeweled the apartment windows with tiny liquid beads. On her wooden desk, old turpentine-soaked rags and crusted paintbrushes cluttered the space. The room was dim, except for a light that was clamped on her easel, pointed toward an empty canvas. As her paintbrush danced across the canvas, leaving behind thick globs of color, she began to feel disheartened on this day. She was particularly uninspired by the still life of plastic fruit and glass bottles she had set up on the window sill. Art was the coals that fed the F.L. Alma's and Julien's soul. Painting was the only thing that made her feel like an accomplished human being. She glanced over at her bookshelf and instantly one book in particular caught her eye. It was one on how to paint landscapes. She thumbed through the pages until she came across a photo of interest. A picture of a forest. Julienne paused for a second, thinking of a way to approach this painting. She looked around the room at the stacks of unfinished works. I need a change, she thought, and with her newfound inspiration she packed up her supplies, a bag full of assorted brush, as a few blank canvases and her easel, and kissed her black and white caddish on his nose. She packed her things into the back seat and got into her jeep. By 3:00 p.m. the rain had halted, but the gloomy atmosphere still persisted and a thin blanket of mist yet lingered. Julienne drove out of the city past apartment buildings and concrete districts until the surroundings became increasingly suburban and eventually wooded. After a half hour of driving, the state forest sign appeared ahead and she turned into the parking lot. She stepped out of the vehicle and inhaled, taking in a lungful of the late October chill. She threw on a jacket over her hoodie, tucked her fold-up easel under her arm, and slung her bag of art supplies over her shoulder. There was a 15-minute walk along the train tracks that ran parallel to the forest's edge to get to the opening where Julienne wanted to enter the woods. As she walked further and further down the path, she noticed how, although most of the leaves were gone from the trees, the forest was still thick with thicket and thorn bushes. The forest was beautiful, though, and Julienne was happiest when she was in the wilderness, among all things natural. The path twisted and turned around bare trees and fallen logs until she stopped at a stream. She became mesmerized by the crystal water that cascaded over the smooth rocks. A satisfied smile showed across her delicate features as she realized she had found the ultimate spot. Once the canvas was set up on the easel and her paints were out and ready, she lightly sketched the scene first, planning where she would carve the trickling creek through the brown forest on the canvas. She noted exactly where each tree would go, sketching the trunks softly, and where the tiny beams of sunlight would come streaming through the tree branches. It watched her, it monitored her every move. It curiously turned its head from side to side, watching its prey. The creature usually walked on all fours, but as it stalked her, it crouched on its scrawny hind legs. Its front limbs were curved, serrated scythes like that of a praying mantis. It only stood 3 feet off the ground. At most, it possessed for large black eyes on the top of its head, a range like that of a spider's. for portals of inquisitiveness that stalked with the curiosity of a child, but with the malicious intent of a murderer. The sudden crunch of a branch a few yards away made Julienne turn around and scan the edge of the foliage directly. Why, behind her there was nothing there, nothing that she could see, and so she went back to her artwork. It knew that its prey was becoming aware of its presence in the brush, and it knew it had to be cautious if it wanted to have a meal. It began to silently scale a tree, digging its mantis-like limbs into the bark. It crept out onto a tree limb overhanging Julienne and peered down at her, its bulbous eyes intensely stalking her. It picked up her delicious scent, and then it began to salivate. Nightfall was slowly encroaching on the dense forest, and Julienne was adding finishing brush strokes to her new piece of artwork. A drop of liquid landed on her cheek, and she brushed it off with the back of her hand. Julienne looked up at the forest canopy above her. There was nothing there, but a slight breeze blew through the trees and sent water droplets down to the forest floor. She began to pack up her things. It had since moved from the tree and was now watching her from a greater distance. It was becoming desperate. Now it needed to make a kill. The bloodthirsty thing decided to move in on her. As she was about to sling her bag over her shoulder, reach erupted from the dark brush, and she shot straight up. Did she just imagine that? Her subconscious wanted to tell her so very badly that the sound wasn't real, but her instincts were pleading oath. Otherwise, it sounded again, a blood-chilling, high-pitched shriek that lasted for seconds. It wasn't earthly at all. Everything about the sound was alarming, and it gave her goosebumps. Something was moving toward her in the distance, the underbrush rustling with every step. It started out slow-paced, and then picked up speed. Something was darting towards her. Julienne, being a ski-led outdoorswoman, decided she wasn't going down without trying, and so she ran in the opposite direction, ripping through thorn bushes and tree branches. She was sprinting as fast as she could possibly run. She heard the noise again, but this time it was more of a groan. It was only a couple of yards ahead of her. Ahead, she thought to herself, this thing is swift. She aimed her eyes in what was now turning into darkness. The sun was sinking away behind the trees. She was left alone without the comfort of day. A tear streamed down her cheek, past her chin, and gently fell to the ground. She could not speak. She could not move. She could only watch as a claw forelimb curled around the trunk of an evergreen tree in front of her, and then a second limb appeared. Whatever the thing was, it was clinging to the other side of the tree, hanging there a few feet above the ground. Julienne stood there for a while, tears silently pouring out. She was hasty-eyed, lines paralyzed with fear, and could only stand there, forced to watch. The creature made its way down the tree trunk to the forest floor and inched toward her. As it neared, she could barely breathe. The hellish thing was so hideous, she tried to utter, "Oh my God," but all that came out of her was a whimper. The creature was now directly in front of her, and it was making sounds, almost like radio static, as if it were responding to her whimpers. Her eyes widened as its own empty eyes peered up at her. It began clicking its insect-like mandibles together, ready to seize her. It fiercely roared and screeched, slicing its front limbs through the air as Julienne put out her hands to defend herself. She was knocked back by the force of the thing, and she tumbled backwards, slamming her head on a large stone. Laying on her back, she began to drift away. She could only feel defeated as she watched the disturbing creature crawl towards her. She closed her eyes and prepared herself to be devoured. A thick fog permeated the forest, and sunlight penetrated the forest canopy, signaling the arrival of day. The sun's rays beat down on Julianne's pearly facial features and warmed her cold skin. Her eyes opened wide in sudden terror, and she inhaled deeply. Coming out of shock, she laid there for a while with her red hair wet and matted to her face, then sat up and looked around. Cardinals and blue jays were singing in the canopy above. It was an altogether brighter day, and she was ecstatic and grateful to be alive. Julianne took off her jacket and checked her body. To her utter surprise, she had no wounds other than a few minor scrapes from the thorn bushes. The creature had left her alone. Barely able to stand up, she limped down the path and made her way through the woods, shrouded in dense mist. The forest now seemed more like a fairy tale. The way back to the parking lot was a long one for Julianne as she marched along the train tracks, head held high, and made it to the Jeep. She put the keys in the ignition and sped towards the city. All Julianne could do when she got home was crawl under the covers while her mind raced. What the hell had attacked her? Where did it come from? And why was it there? It was obvious the horrid thing was not of Earth, or at least the elusive predator had not been discovered until now. Something began to scratch and claw at the bedroom door. Julianne lost her breath and began to shake. She started to sob again and watched in horror as the door creaked open and a dark figure darted across the bedroom floor. She pulled the covers tightly over her head as she felt it crawl into bed with her. And then it began to purr. Ash, she proclaimed, pulling the blanket off. Her cat licked her cheek. She had never felt so relieved in her life. She hugged Ash and wept, rocking back and forth. She kissed the tuxedo cat on his white paws and in his neck. The feeling of relief subsided when she caught a glimpse of two mantis-like forelimbs slowly curl around the doorframe.